This is right on the eve of Isaac getting married, taking Rebekah, and basically making her his wife. So now Abraham again takes a wife, and her name was Keturah. And we're going to go through the names tonight, so get ready. And she bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan begat Sheba and Dedan, and the sons of Dedan were Asherim, Letushim, and Luim. I know I butchered those, but there we go. I know it, exactly. I should get you to read these Jewish names here. And the sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Abida, and Eldah. All these were the children of Keturah. And Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac. Take note of that. All that he had to Isaac. But Abraham gave gifts to the sons of the concubines which Abraham had. And while he was still living, he sent them eastward, away from his son Isaac, to the country of the east. Okay, so here we are. The author here obviously mentions, Moses mentions that Abraham is taking another wife, Keturah here. But remember, Isaac is the son of promise. He's the one that he's waited for. Remember, he went through the whole deal with Ishmael and everything. And then, of course, he has several other children and everything. But Isaac is the son of promise. So Abraham's other sons, by other women, were just given a few gifts and sent eastward. I read this years ago, and I had lost where I read it, and I couldn't find it, so I went back this week and kind of dug back into it again. And I thought this was kind of interesting. Maybe you've never heard this before, maybe you have heard it, and it's pretty common. It was just new to me when I read it the first time. But there is something in Scripture about going eastward. Anybody ever heard this? Okay. When you go to the east, biblically, going east biblically is kind of taken as a negative connotation. All right? So when you go to the east, it kind of seems to symbolize a departure from God. So when you go to the east, you're kind of going away from the things of God. Going to the west, if you remember when God called people, again and again He called them. Seemed like even Abraham, he went to the west again. But when they go back to the east, it's a symbol of of the west is like drawing closer to God. East is like going away from it. Now, this is not a standard rule throughout all the Scripture. You just see it a lot in Scripture. I'll just give you some examples. For example, Adam and Eve. After they are expelled from the Garden of Eden, God places a cherubim on the east of the garden, the implication that humanity is now outside to the east, away from God's immediate presence. So you go a little bit further, Cain, for example. Cain, after murdering Abel, Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Again, east is associated with exile and being out of the presence of God. The Tower of Babel. The people migrate from the east, right, and settle in Shinar to build the Tower of Babel. And they're not necessarily heading to the east here, but it's saying that those from the east, right? And Lot, over in Genesis 13:11, he chooses to go which direction? East. He goes to the east, away from God, towards Sodom, ultimately leading to all his downfall and everything else. So Abraham stays to the westward, to the side of God. The tabernacle and the temple. In the design of the tabernacle and the temple, entrances face east, meaning worshipers come from the east and move westward, symbolizing approaching God. Now, anybody ever heard any of that stuff before? It fascinated me way back when. I remember some of those things, but I couldn't remember it too exactly, and so I just kind of had to look it up again. May not be any truth to it at all, but it surely seems interesting that in the Bible it kind of hints toward that at least, and not as a standard rule, but just as a general rule. So, anyway, Abraham was now ensuring that his other sons, by sending them off to the east, wouldn't supplant Isaac as the rightful heir. He is the one, I got to get rid of all these that may be a problem later on. And so Isaac not only inherited great wealth, he also inherited the great promise and the blessings that obviously was bestowed upon him. So pick back up again in verse 7 with me, read down a couple of verses through 10. So this is the sum of the years of Abraham's life which he lived. So we're closing down on the life of Abraham. 175 years. Then Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. And his son Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, which is before Mamre, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, the field which Abraham purchased from the sons of Heth. There Abraham was buried, and Sarah his wife. And it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac dwelt in the land of Beer Lahai Roi. So when Abraham took his last breath and when he died, here in verse 8 we find out that he was 175 years old, and it brought together his two sons that had been estranged from one another. Isaac and Ishmael buried their father together with his wife Sarah there in the cave of Machpelah. It doesn't mean that the family strife had ended. You know, some of us could testify to estranged family members, right? And then we have a grandmother or someone, some patriarch or matriarch in the family pass away, and then they come together for the funeral, but as soon as the funeral is over with, what happens? They part their ways and they never have anything to do. And it's a sad situation, but it is a reality for a lot of people. And so out of respect for their father, Abraham, Isaac and Ishmael do come together. But this family strife that they had, it's not over with, but it's temporarily put on hold during this kind of solemn time, I guess you would call it. So it's a way of saying that Ishmael was at the funeral, but he wasn't in the wheel. Kind of makes sense? So that's the story as we go so far. Now, Ishmael here is a picture of the natural or the unsaved person who is outside the faith and hostile to the things of God. 1 Corinthians 2 says it this way, but the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. But now Isaac pictures those who have trusted Jesus Christ and experienced the miraculous new birth of the power of God. That's why our story continues through the life of Isaac and not through the life of Ishmael, because he was the promised son. He was the one that represents that Christian. But now, as we see, we're about to find out the genealogy of even Ishmael, what happens down his family line. So Ishmael, we know, was born a slave, but Isaac was born free. Ishmael was born poor, Isaac was born rich. Not materialistically, even though it was there, but spiritually. Every believer shares in all the blessings of the Spirit of Christ in their glorious inheritance. You know that? Think about I think when we become a Christian sometimes we just think we've joined a club. Can I tell you there's so much more to our faith than joining a club. There is the blessings beyond measure that Christ offers us. And we have to understand that what we are inheriting is what Christ inherited. You know, we get to take part in that. The most important part of Isaac's legacy wasn't that tremendous material wealth that his father had left for him. It was the spiritual wealth that he got. It was the spiritual wealth from his father and his mother, and knowing and trusting who the one true and living God is, and being a part of those blessings from God as they were bestowed upon Abraham. Now, we often think how tragic it is when a family patriarch or a matriarch has worked hard, and we've probably told these stories, maybe even here in this church, where we see a family matriarch or patriarch who worked hard their entire life to accumulate, you know, some type of wealth, maybe not rich, but wealth and things for their family. And within a generation or two, it's all wasted away. You ever heard of this story? You know, usually, I've heard it said that usually it's that one generation that gets it, and then the next generation benefits from it, and the third and the fourth generation just blow it all. So why not feel even more tragic about the same kind of spiritual legacy? You think about children and grandchildren who turn from that great legacy of that Christian grandmother and grandfather, and and trade it all in for something much less valuable. How many people in here today that are a mother or a grandmother or even a great-grandmother have a child or a grandchild or a great-grandchild that's living outside of the Lord? And that spiritual legacy that you're really trying to pass along to your family, it's kind of like they've just tossed it aside and are pursuing things outside of that great blessing. It's tragic. It's heartbreaking. I can't do that in the house of the Lord. Sorry. Let's look at the next verse, verse 12. Now, this is the genealogy of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar, the Egyptian, Sarah's maidservant, bore to Abraham. And these were the names of the sons of Ishmael by their names according to their generations. The firstborn, here we go again, Ishmael. Nebajoth, then Kedar and Abdil, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadar, Tema, Judah, Naphish, and Kedemah. Did I do any better on that one? A little better? Okay, good. These were the sons of Ishmael, and these were their names by their towns and their settlements. 12 princes according to their nations. Now, how many tribes of Israel were there? 12. How many princes do we have? 12. These were the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years, and he breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people. They dwelt from Havilah as far as Shur, which is east of Egypt as you go toward Assyria. He died in the presence of all his brethren. So again, we find another genealogy here, which kind of shows you again another change in the plot a little bit. We saw where it went from where Isaac dwelt to now the genealogy of Ishmael. And what it is really more than anything is a confirmation in the blessing that God has put upon Isaac. That's what it's talking about. Yeah, we're going to mention Ishmael here, but it's really about, in contrast to Ishmael, here's what Isaac is, and that's where he's fixing to go into this. And so even though Ishmael does have a lineage of his own, we know about the lineage of Ishmael, and he has a long life of himself, the story kind of leaves him behind here. It's kind of like, okay, we're moving on past Ishmael here, and now we're going to begin down the storyline that leads us to Christ. And so that's really what all this is about. So that's where verse 19 picks up. So he gives you the contrast of Ishmael, and he has his family, and he has his princes and all them that come from him. But here, this is the genealogy of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begot Isaac. Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah his wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Padan Aram, and the sister of Laban the Syrian. Now Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren. So here we've got similar situation with Abraham and Sarah, but Isaac now is pleading for his wife Rebekah because she was barren, and the Lord granted his plea. And Rebekah, his wife, conceived. But the children struggled together within her. This is the big part right here. And she said, "If all is well, why am I like this?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb. Two peoples shall be separated from your body. One people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger." So not only is he telling her what's going on with her pregnancy and what's going on within her body, but he's saying this is a prophecy. This is going to tell you what's going to happen to the generations down the line. And of course, we see that Isaac and Rebekah has a problem that's very similar to the parents, with Rebekah unable to have children. But we don't have the long story that goes with it like we did with Sarah. But we do know that it is noticed here and that God does answer the prayer. And so she, not only does he answer the prayer, he gives her a duplicate, right? He gives twins. Anybody been surprised with twins before? Oh, yes. There you go. So God's blessings, as I say oftentimes, is not just filling your cup. It always overflows, right? So you got the double blessing there. So even before their birth, even before these two were born, Jacob and Esau were battling one another. Foreshadowing, right? The coming conflict that's going to take place even to the day that we're in today. But it's really their nations, these two nations, Israel and Edom. These are the future nations that come from these two. So God also let Rebekah in on another surprising detail here. Contrary to the custom of the day, normally the older son would get the birthright and the blessing, right? But here he tells her that the older will serve the younger. Well, this is obviously contrary to what their customs were and everything else. So this is obviously going to be different. So just as God had chosen Isaac, the secondborn, and not Ishmael, the firstborn, so he also chose Jacob, the secondborn, not Esau, the firstborn. And it's what he's really doing is going against human tradition and going against human logic. You know, they have a way that the world operates, and even outside of the Christian faith, many of these customs are common in the world. But God, as he always seems to do, seems to go against the grain, right? He does things a little differently. And so here in verse 24 and 25 and 26, he says this, when her days were fulfilled for her to give birth, indeed there were twins in her womb. When the first came out red, he was like a hairy garment all over. So they called his name Esau. Afterward, his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel. So his name was called Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore them. So the older is kind of covered with red hair, kind of had a reddish complexion, almost like a fur coat. Esau, the word Edom is a Hebrew word for red, so that's where you get that Edomites. But the younger grasping the older's heel with his hand, the word Jacob, he grasps the heel, or he strives, or you may have heard this, he deceives. And Jacob is known as a trickster throughout life a little bit later on, one of the reasons God changed his name. But both of them are prophetic over their lives, what their lives are like. And so in verse 27, we see a couple of things here that shows you the personality differences. And Isaac said, jump to the wrong chapter. So the boys grew, and Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field. But Jacob was a mild man, dwelling in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game. But Rebekah loved Jacob. All right, husbands and wives, I want you to look around at each other. Do you play favorites? Said, no, I dislike one as much as I do the other. But we do have those children of ours, and sometimes grandchildren, that maybe remind us of ourselves a little bit or remind us of what we value. And we see that is no different. Esau's more the outgoing, outdoorsy type. Jacob's more the homebody, maybe the indoorsy type here. And of course, they're favored as such. It's not unusual among siblings. How many of you had kids that are exactly the same? Right, they're all different, right? Some of them are completely polar opposites. I think that's the rule sometimes. But the problem with that is, even though these children are different, it's the parents who chose the favorites, right? They're the ones that kind of, Isaac, he loved Esau because he was a man's man. He liked to hunt and fish and, do that kind of stuff. Be outside. Rebekah loved Jacob because he helped her fold clothes. No, I'm just kidding. He loved spending time at home, right? He didn't like to get out and do all that other stuff. So really, in reality, even though these two are different, the parents were as much to blame as anyone in this feud between the boys because of how they treated them. So what continues to happen here? Now Jacob cooked a stew, and Esau came in from the field, and he was weary. And Esau said to Jacob, please feed me with the same red stew, for I am weary. Therefore his name was called Edom. But Jacob said, sell me your birthright as of this day. And Esau said, look, I'm about to die, so what is this birthright to me? And then Jacob said, swear to me as of this day. So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob gave Esau bread and stew of lentils. Then he ate and drank, arose, and went his way. And then Esau despised his birthright. So, heir today, gone tomorrow. He was so cavalier and so careless with this custom and really this privilege that he had. And so as he shows up one day just starving to death, that's what he means by that. You know, he's really just saying, oh, look, I'm starving to death. If I don't have something, I'm just going to die. So what is it? I'd rather give this up than die of starvation, right? And so he comes in and makes an incredibly foolish and really impetuous trade. Why would you do something like this? Esau gave up his inheritance to Jacob in exchange for a bowl of food. Now, I love it when my wife cooks. You can look at me and tell that. But there's a couple of things I might trade for it, but I don't know that I would trade my birthright for it. You know, both my brothers are taller and better looking than me and both have hair and all that stuff. So I can at least say I'm the oldest and I'm the favorite. So there you go. I know that is funny if you've met my brothers. So Jacob, being the strategic man that he was quick to seize on Esau's hunger, his desperation that he had, right? So he immediately decided to squeeze him for all it was worth. Do you have siblings that do this? Take advantage of the other, make trades, you know, do these kind of things. That's what they're doing, what brothers do. So he says, sell me your birthright. He even made sure to put Esau on the hook by having him swear an oath. Swear to me today. You know, if we were children, we would say, promise, you know, make a promise, pinky swear, whatever you want to call it. And so Jacob's grasping and really, some call it deceiving. I don't necessarily say it was deceiving. He was pretty open about it. Are on full display here. You can see early on why Jacob later on is known as the trickster, because of how he does things. But Esau, on the other hand, he also proved to reflect his own character. He was very impulsive. He was very short-sighted. He was all about the here and now, not about the tomorrow. And when faced with the prospect of losing his double inheritance, he reasoned that he was about to die. So what good is a birthright? How meaningless is that to him? So in other words, what Esau did was settle for temporary satisfaction over hanging on to something much more spiritually valuable. I think we sometimes can struggle with that in our lives. It's easier to pursue the comforts of this world before we pursue the spiritual things of this world. You think about in your own life decisions that you've made. Think about areas in your life where you've made sacrifices and it wasn't for the godly reasons. And that's what the author here really meant when he says Esau despised his birthright. It did not have the value in his eyes that it should have had. And it was really insignificant to just a single bowl of whatever. It meant nothing to him. You know, Hebrews 12:16 warns us to avoid being an immoral or irrelevant person like Esau. That's what Scripture says. An immoral or irreverent person like Esau. He didn't see the value in this promise of being the son of Isaac, who was the son of Abraham. So when we read this, we've got to learn, never let physical satisfaction take precedent over spiritual priorities. We're all a little bit older in here now. I won't call ages, but I can say this. I had a friend of mine, pastor friend of mine. He used to say this. He would talk to youth sometimes, and he would say this to our youth. And Tanner and I were talking about this today. He said, we're raised with Christian principles and Christian, ideals that we're supposed to live by.
And we're supposed to make up our mind about some of these things long before we actually are in the heat of the battle, right? Long before you're starving like Esau is here. So he would say, you know, the back seat of the car on Friday night is not a time to make your decision. Right? Yeah, you're supposed to have made that decision long before you're in that situation, right? Long before you're starving to death like Esau, you've already made your decision that you won't put yourself in that position, right? So in reality, that's what we see. We often fall to the things of the flesh because we haven't upheld the principles that we say we value. We've put ourselves in that position to fail or to allow, you know, God always makes, what does he say? Always makes a way out of temptation. But a lot of times we ignore that. We blow right past it. And we put ourselves right in that temptation. And we wonder why we stumble and fall. And we wonder why we let him down so many times. And we wonder why we stump our toes or we do these things, right? I'll be truthful for you. Are we streaming tonight? We are? Okay, I won't say this then. All right. I'll tell y'all when the camera goes off. We are not to be the impulsive fool that Esau was. That's not who we are as Christians are supposed to be. We're supposed to be more principled. We're supposed to be more responsible. We're supposed to be more aware of situations in our life. Throwing away our future for momentary pleasure or satisfaction or any of this stuff should not be the evidence in the life of a Christian. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And we see this story, well, a long story, a story every one of us in here probably heard before, Esau and Jacob and all their conflict and everything. But folks, we struggle with some of the same things. We look at Esau and we say, hey, no wonder God didn't like him. You know what? God's got every reason not to like us too. Because we do a lot like Esau. And we throw away the things of value that God tells us are really valuable. And we throw away the things of spiritual application in our life because we're more worried about the physical comforts of this world. So just like Esau gave up his birthright for a quick meal, we often sacrifice long-term blessings for short-term desires. And God calls us to see the bigger picture. He calls us to see his plan for our lives instead of what we are flying by the seat of our pants to fulfill. Yeah. That's kind of how that story speaks to me. Maybe it speaks to you that way. I pray that it does, because I want to tell you there's a lot of application here. We may see this as a story that, yeah, you know, I've heard this story a million times, but I want to tell you there's a lot of truth that we can put in our lives from this story right here. And you say, you know, sometimes familiarity is difficult for us because we get so familiar with stories that they kind of turn into Charlie Brown's teacher. You know, I've heard it a million times. But I'm going to tell you, when we learn to listen to what God is saying through these stories, we can hear the application in it. If not, we just hear it and kind of walk out of here and it didn't change anything. But that's why we find ourselves in situations oftentimes like Esau, right? We're missing out on his promises. We're missing out on his timing in our life. We're missing out on the spiritual inheritance. So if I had a question to kind of close it with tonight, what are you trading your birthright for? What things in your life are you making those what seem like silly trades when in reality we're to stand on the principle of what God has called us to? Certainly God honors Jacob in this situation, but Jacob was no saint. But Esau was just flippant with all of it. So that's what I got tonight.